Hey, greetings, everyone. Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, and welcome to the Steadfast and Loyal podcast.
You gotta light 'em up before they burn it down. Better dig deep and put 'em in the ground. Blood on their hands, they're hellbound. Save us all. Ooh, they're gonna burn it down. Save us all before they burn it down.
This episode of the Steadfast and Loyal podcast is brought to us by our friends at the United States Concealed Carry Association. And I just got a chance to meet those folks. They had a big concealed carry event down here in Fort Worth, Texas. The United States Concealed Carry Association literally helps to save lives. And let me explain. The USCCA is a membership association that provides self-defense education, training, and peace of mind to over 500,000 responsibly armed Americans nationwide. Click Learn More below right now if you're ready to start your journey as one of them. When you activate your membership, you'll get access to expert self-defense education, life-saving training, and self-defense liability insurance. These resources are literally life-saving, and the USCCA has first-person testimonies proving it. With your membership, you'll get access to hundreds of hours of training, videos, articles, checklists, guides, and more. You'll be able to get instant up-to-date information about everything from gun laws to ammunition types to home self-defense drills. And best of all, it's 100% risk-free with the United States Concealed Carry Association's money-back, bulletproof guarantee. That means that if you decide the USCCA isn't for you, simply call to request a prompt and courteous refund. So what are you waiting for? Click Learn More below right now. Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to the Steadfast and Loyal podcast. And we need to make sure that we don't forget that terrorism is still out there and it's still quite prevalent. You know, we live here in Texas, and of course, we have seen some 114 members that are on the terrorist watch list be caught trying to come across the border. But when you have 1 million these, gotaways that have come into the country, how many are on the terrorist watch list? And of course, if you go back not too long ago, we remember the 13, the Marine sailor and a soldier who lost their lives in Afghanistan due to a terrorist attack. And so what we want to do is go back a decade. And I remember when this happened because I happened to be a member of the United States Congress at the time, and talk about what happened in Benghazi, because those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And it's so important we don't allow media talking points or politicized talking points to get us off of where we need to be focused. So now we are joined by Sarah Adams and Dave Benton. Sarah Adams. Sarah was an intelligence analyst and targeter with the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. She also served as the senior advisor to the United States House of Representatives Select Committee on Benghazi. Currently, she leads the Department of Defense research and development efforts to discover, incubate, and deliver innovative, data-driven, technology-enabled solutions to answer complex national security challenges. And Dave Benton served over 25 years specializing with specialized teams and leadership roles in our United States military, also with law enforcement and protective security, and was also part of the United States government's intelligence community. He was a member of the Annex Security Team that responded to the September 11th, 2012 terrorist attacks on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi, Libya. His story was told in the book, 13 Hours, the inside account of what really happened in Benghazi, authored by Mitchell Zukov. Now, these two former CIA officers have come together with a new book. And this new book that was released on 25 October of this year, Benghazi, Know Thy Enemy, and if you know a little bit about Sun Tzu, you know where that comes from, offers an intimate look into the terrorists who started the September the 11th, 2012 attacks. And they carried out a series of terrorist attacks on the U.S. consulate and CIA annex in Benghazi, Libya. The attacks killed 4 Americans, to include Ambassador Chris Stevens, State Department employee Sean Smith, and 2 former Navy SEALs, Glenn Doherty and Ty Woods. Starting immediately inside the first chapter, the authors explained the attacks were a planned al-Qaeda operation. Now deceased al-Qaeda leader Dr. Ayman Zawahiri directed the operation. On July the 31st of 2022, the United States killed al-Zawahiri in an airstrike in Kabul, Afghanistan. It is evident within the book's pages that this was not a random mob, as some would say. It was a planned and coordinated international effort. Sarah and David, thank you so much for being with us here at the Steadfast and Loyal podcast. You know, some people would say that, I hate to use these words of Hillary Clinton, at this point, what difference does it make? But the difference is that, again, we are about to go into the holiday season, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and there are going to be people that won't be at that table with their families. And so we should never forget these things. But what inspired you all to come out with this book 10 years later?
Yeah, I mean, what you actually brought up in part of your introduction is why it matters right now. You know, one of the things is a lot of our terrorists, they fought in Afghanistan, they trained in Afghanistan. And, you know, that's obviously becoming another issue again. Training camps are popping up every day there. Another issue is a lot of these attackers, because they weren't identified, they aren't on watch lists. So they don't even have to come illegally over a border. They can fly right in the United States safely and commit an attack over the holidays. It's pretty dangerous just to let these terrorists be free. So that's pretty much what motivated us. We wanted someone to go after the attackers to keep people safe. They've killed thousands of people in the last decade. So other people are impacted by them, even if they haven't killed a lot of other people we know. We have shown in the book other Americans, though, that they have killed since the September 2012 attacks.
Another motivating factor was that nothing was being done.
Yes.
Our government failed to really pursue the terrorists, to really bring them to justice. So we decided to do it ourselves.
Well, it's interesting. So often people refer to the quote unquote war on terror as a police action. I don't see it as a police action. This is, a dedicated insurgency, and we're fighting against non-state, non-uniform belligerents on the battlefield, and we're supposed to pursue them. And so, Sarah, you bring up a great point. Here we had the individuals that were the top level leaders of the Taliban in Guantanamo Bay, and now they're right back into power in Afghanistan. And if we don't think that this can recycle itself and we can go right back into the cycle that we saw, that culminated in this attack 10 years ago, because terrorism just doesn't sit in one place, it metastasizes and it spreads all out. So what are your concerns from Benghazi to where we are today, these 10 years? What are your concerns that you have, and how many of these terrorists that participated or were maybe in small or minor leadership roles in Benghazi are still out there?
Yeah, I mean, one of those concerns is what you just brought out, the second generation or even the first generation becoming leaders. So a lot of our attackers fought with Al-Qaeda in Iraq. So they were just low-level grunts then. And like the commander who led the attack on the ground that night, he now, at the time of the attacks, was one of the AQI leaders for all of Libya, right? So these guys are moving up the ranks. They're being involved in other attacks. They're becoming senior. They're now the leaders of these organizations. So that's really concerning.
Dave, anything to add?
No, absolutely. If you look at the book, there is a history of where these guys came from. A lot of them have started way before Iraq. A lot of them started fighting with bin Laden in Afghanistan and even in Algeria. So there's a consistency of these terrorists continuing to pass on their jihad as they move up. So some of the leaders now, as Sarah said, were low-level grunts during the early days. Now, this is just going to continue. And as you mentioned before, not only Libya, but with Afghanistan is going to become a problem again. Yeah. It's starting to become a breeding ground like it was before for these young leaders to rise up and gain strength. So we'll definitely see this again.
Yeah, and for the last part of your question, at least half of the attackers are still at large. And the concerning thing is we couldn't find some of the attackers. We identified them at the attacks. We have not found out where they are in the last 10 years. So have they, gone into a society and given up jihad? I doubt it. They're probably living in societies. They're living maybe in like Northern Europe, and people don't even know they're terrorists. So it's pretty dangerous.
Yeah, it's absolutely dangerous, and it's amazing to me that we can, if you were in Washington D.C. on January the 6th, people can show up at your door and find you, but yet these individuals over these years we still have not been able to find and bring to justice. Dave, I just got to tell you, having been a soldier myself, when you think about being there on the ground and being a part of what happened and fighting for your life, when you come back and you see the things were being said and the narratives that were out there, very dismissive, and what difference does it make? How did that affect you? I mean, to me, it has to be very painful to really feel like your country abandoned you in that firefight that lasted for 13 hours.
So it is very disheartening and it is disappointing. During the time, I was still working with the agency, and I continued to till 2016. But it is very disappointing that nothing was ever really done.
And so many of the people that were in those leadership positions, again, nobody held responsible, nobody held accountable. And, in 13 hours, how is it, if someone is sitting and aware of what's going on in a situation room, and I understand and know how we have quick reaction forces and regional reaction forces. How is it? Did you all get a sense of understanding where the breakdown was that no support ever came?
No, a lot of that was in hindsight, after the fact, a lot of the pieces started to fit together. But during that time, we had no idea. I mean, if you look at it, the system as a whole was broke. It wasn't just, a CIA issue or a State Department issue or issue. All those issues came together to play a big part. And the whole system was broken. It needs to be fixed. And it still has
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, it was a multi-agency, situation, not just CIA and Department of State, but the Department of Defense, everybody. But again, if you're sitting there and you're aware of this, because we had the drones up and they were showing live feeds, then you go into crisis action mode. I mean, Americans are under attack. Americans are there, but yet again, it was just dismissive nature, and I still don't understand why no one has been held accountable to that. Just the same as you fast forward to recently with what happened in Afghanistan with those 13 Marines, a soldier, and sailor, and so. I just got to tell you, when we go back and we look at these things and we see these things, how do you think that's affecting? Well, I know how it's affecting. We see our recruiting and retention, being at all-time lows. But how does that affect the psyche of a nation when they never see anyone held responsible and accountable for the loss of? I mean, an ambassador, two former Navy SEALs, and a State Department employee, Sean Smith, IT specialist. Where are their families? I mean, were the families involved in speaking with you all about this book, or how you all have any relationship with them whatsoever?
Yeah, I'll do two parts to that. So first is kind of like the moral injury caused, by something like Benghazi or Afghanistan to like government workers, right? Either being CIA or the military. That's a huge problem. One of the things we heard a lot about in Benghazi in terms of like moral injury were those individuals who actually had to go and capture Abu Ahmed Khattala. They were told he was the mastermind of Benghazi attacks. They went and did an operation in Libya and captured him. And then they realized after the fact he wasn't. And so they felt lied to by their government, right? They're like, they sent us into in the foreign country to do an operation. It could have been dangerous. We could have got killed. And it was a fake mastermind. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of the frustration. And we saw that in Kabul when they kind of lies about who committed the suicide attack, and then they did the drone strike on the USAID worker and said he was an ISIS member, and that was a lie. I think that's the part that people are getting pretty frustrated with. It's like, give us the facts, even if the facts aren't good. We want to know the truth. Like, stop lying to us. And then another thing is, we let the families know we were doing the investigation, but only until recently, because we did the investigation in secret, so we wouldn't be bothered from outside entities, being different government agents. We wanted to do the investigation properly. So we did notify the families. We also notified the State Department personnel in Benghazi prior to the book coming out, so they were aware.
Now how much your investigation now is open source, that anyone can go out there and see, because in your first week the book has been a bestseller on both Barnes and Noble and Amazon, and 150 attackers at the consulate alone, over 50 cited as members of Al Qaeda. It was the largest terrorist attack on a U.S. diplomatic mission in history, and again we just act like no big deal. So how much of this, is easily accessible to any American citizen out there?
So the entire book is open source, and we
Yeah.
wanted to do it open source. And that's kind of telling. So if the two of us, even though we have intelligence backgrounds, if the two of us can find 150 attackers, what could we do if we actually use the resources of our government?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons we actually made it open source, of course, we want to share with the public so they know the truth, but we made it open source because we didn't trust our government would go after the attackers. So if we could make the details available to the French or the Algerians or the Egyptians or the Emiratis, maybe they would go after some of our terrorists and watch list them in their countries. And we think it could give us a big assist in the investigation.
So again, fast forward to where we are now from, a decade ago. What is your biggest concern for the United States of America when you have done this investigation, when we know those folks are still out there, when we know we have a wide open border that no one is doing anything about, and you want to talk about government lying to us, telling us that the border is secure, and we've had 5 million people cross over illegally, 1 million gotaways we know nothing about, 114 on the terrorist watch list that we know. What concerns you all the most about where we are today in America?
Yeah, I think one of the issues I'm concerned with is that there's this huge focus on this term domestic terrorism, and they're almost pushing aside anything that's international terrorism. Another thing we learned in our investigation, FBI should not be the organization investigating incidents overseas. So they do if an American's involved in a terrorist activity overseas, and then they do hostage situations overseas. They don't have the source networks. They don't have the relationships. They don't have the insights. Like I said, their focus has become domestic terrorism. They're not smart anymore in international terrorism. So they should not be the people doing that. And it's concerning. It shouldn't be in their lane anymore.
Another concern for us is the attackers that were in Libya weren't just Libyans. It just wasn't a Libyan problem. Historically, if you look, they committed attacks in London. After Libya, after Benghazi, they committed attacks in France. They committed attacks in North Africa. So these terrorists, because they weren't dealt with, continued to commit acts of terrorism. And a lot of them are still at large, and they will commit more acts of terrorism. So it's not just a Libyan problem, it's an international problem.
And again, you bring up another aspect of this systemic problem we have. Why would we take the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and send them overseas to do terrorist investigations? I mean, to me, it makes no sense whatsoever. They don't have the expertise to do that. Do you think there's something nefarious about that? Because we know that the FBI is part of the DOJ, and we know that's part of an administration. So do they want to be able to control the narrative, control the truth, control the facts? I mean, what are your concerns about having, other than the fact that I don't think they have the expertise, as you just articulated? Why do we allow the FBI to be dealing with terrorism investigations on foreign soil?
So that's a good question. Historically, when the FBI first came out, they weren't even authorized to carry firearms. And historically, they continued to grab more and more and more responsibility from other government agencies, to include the State Department, who usually would handle terrorism and events that happened overseas when it came to the American people. Why, I don't know. And not bad-mouthing the FBI as a whole, because I have very good friends who are hardworking FBI special agents, but as a bureaucracy at the top, there's something wrong.
I don't think that you'll get a disagreement from anybody in the United States of America that there's something wrong at the head of the FBI. And you talk about, the FBI starting out not having weapons. I'm trying to understand why IRS agents need to be trained in firearms and have weapons as well. So we got a lot of issues going on here. Okay, so Sarah and Dave, what do you want people to get as the takeaway from your book?
we want to give people an understanding terrorism is still a huge threat. We want people, of course, to go after these attackers, but we're actually way more concerned about what's happening in Afghanistan going forward. For example, in Libya, only 600 terrorists were released during the Arab Spring, but they had the power to basically overthrow a government and then carry out, like you said, the largest terrorist attack on a U.S. facility. In Afghanistan, over 15,000
Yes.
terrorists released. Terrorists are breaking out their comrades in Syria. They've been doing, of course, across North Africa for the last decade. There is a huge terrorism issue, and it's being ignored. It's being swept under the rug. And it's like we're almost waiting for the next attack to occur in the United States.
Yeah, pretty much for me personally, the book is kind of like Covert Influence, where we want the American people to be outraged at their elected officials and the government agencies that aren't acting on their behalf and aren't seeking true justice. It's also written as a tool, as Sarah mentioned before, for other governments, foreign and or our own, to go ahead and actually pursue some of these terrorists. The ones that are incarcerated, we need access to them. They need to be debriefed, if appropriate, extradited to the United States and tried. The ones at large, we need to find them, apprehend them, and then bring them to the United States so they can be held accountable for their actions.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that for whatever reason, no one's talking about international terrorism anymore, even though what we just saw happen in Afghanistan. And just for all of the viewers out here, within the book that Sarah Adams and Dave Benton have written are the dossiers of the attackers, giving the reader a true crime feel into a terrorist incident. These terrorists have remained faceless and nameless to the public for over a decade. One revelation in the book is the presence of two separate attack masterminds. Surprisingly, neither are identifiable with terrorist Ahmed Abu Khattala, who was detained by the FBI. Currently, Khattala, who had nothing really to do with it, is imprisoned in the United States for reportedly being a attack mastermind. But it seems that was not the case. We need to be outraged about what is happening, because the last thing we need is to have a government that lies to us about our security and our safety, because we may be just moments away from another September 11th type of event here in the United States of America. The new book came out October the 25th, 2022, Benghazi, Know Thy Enemy, written by Sarah Adams and Dave Benton. Where can people find the book?
Yeah, you can get it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Okay, get it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. I think this is a great gift coming up into this Christmas season, because if you know your enemy and you know yourself and you know the environment in which you are in, as Sun Tzu would say, you'll be successful in all of your battles. But if you know not your enemy, and you know not yourself, and you know not the atmosphere and the environment, for every battle that you enter into, you will not be successful. So that's the art of war. And thank you for helping us to know the enemy. And this is relevant to where we are here today, a decade later. And one of the things that I had the opportunity of doing was Ty Woods, his widowed wife, and his little son. I was there at the Navy SEAL Museum in Fort Pierce, Florida, and got to meet them and be with them. And I told them we can never rest until we make sure that the people that caused your husband to lose his life are brought to justice. And I don't care if that justice means a bullet to their freaking head, because that's just what they deserve. So God bless you all. Thank you so much for being with us on the Steadfast and Law podcast. And thanks for writing this book, Benghazi, Know Thy Enemy. Sarah Adams and Dave Benton, two true American patriots. And that's why we live in this great nation, as long as we have people like them to keep us educated and informed and make us aware of what's going on. One of the things that we have to look at, we got a new Congress coming in, the 118th Congress. And I don't care, Republican or Democrat, this is about Americans. And if you're not going out there and making sure that the people that did this 10 years ago are brought to justice, shame on you. God bless you all, and thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much for joining us on this episode of the Steadfast and Law podcast. And remember, if you like what you have seen, please hit the like button and share it with others. Our mission here is to inform you, educate, and activate you to be a better American citizen. Thanks to Sarah Adams and Dave Benton, the authors of the book, Benghazi, Know Thy Enemy. It is still important that we focus on jihadism and Islamic terrorism, and we've got to protect our borders and protect the American people. So God bless you all. Thank you for joining us, and always remember, steadfast and loyal.
Before they burn it down.